One of the reasons I walked away from the Democratic Party and liberalism is I am so fed up with identity politics. I am so fed up with political correctness. I am so fed up with all of, and everyone here has already said it, it's lack of policy, all identity.
Mayor Pete has been mentioned. Mayor Pete is gay. He's been on the cover of magazines with his husband. Does having somebody who's gay running right now, does that make you want to vote for him?
I think you should vote on policy. I get asked that question all the time. It's great to have a gay candidate. It'd be great to have a lesbian candidate or a trans candidate. I'm looking at the policy. Everything else is peripheral.
I could not care less. I mean, the fact that he is gay doesn't, I think there is such division in the LGBTQ or queer and trans, whatever you call it, community between gay and trans and cis. That doesn't mean he has my back as a trans person. It doesn't mean that he will have trans-affirming policy and support those most marginalized in the trans community. It means nothing to me that he is a gay person because he is also cis and he is also white. And he's holding all of those identities and experiences at the same time. So I would love to see some firm policy proposals that include trans people and non-binary people. We haven't even talked about that yet, but I haven't seen that yet.
I don't know why I'm not more excited about him than I am. There's something missing.
I'm surprised that everybody is so anti-Pete. I mean, I know a lot of sort of Pete-curious conservatives who think he's
Is that like bi-curious?
Yeah, I mean,
That is the most oppressed group in this country.
and one of the main reasons is that I think he's very progressive, but he's tonally moderate. And I think even just listening to us, I mean, everybody's so angry all the time. To have somebody who is somewhat aspirational and who is trying to make a pitch for something better and more, something more uniting. Like, why is that so terrible? I think it's nice.
One of the reasons I walked away from the Democratic Party and liberalism is I am so fed up with identity politics. I am so fed up with political correctness. I am so fed up with all of, and everyone here has already said it, it's lack of policy, all identity. And that's what he is. I mean, he's just a gay man with no ideas.
Okay.
I hate when a lot of conservative folks, well, not even just conservative folks, it's usually just white men across the aisle talk about identity politics.
I knew that was coming.
Because
White,
it's
white,
all
white.
identity politics, right? Like, you all have been moving through the world with your lens as a white man, privileged in many different ways. And
You're
that
privileged
informs
too.
your politics. I do
Black
have
people are
privilege.
privileged
I
too.
have never said that I'm not privileged. I think we all have the capacity
But you
to
speak about
oppress
white privilege
and be
with
an
such
oppressor.
spite.
But I don't have white privilege, right? So that's exactly what we're talking about, right? I also don't have cis privilege, and I don't have your privilege as a man moving through the world. So, like,
But
that matters.
You
for us
don't know
to
my
talk
life.
about.
You don't know my experiences. You're making an assumption about my
I'm not
life and my experiences
I am not
based off of my
making
skin color,
assumptions, right?
based off
I
of my
know-
sexual orientation.
I know.
And aren't we not
I know
supposed
what
to be
is
doing
real.
that?
Okay.
I know
Aren't
what
we
is
not
real in our
supposed to be
country,
doing that?
right?
So,
White
Michaela, I'd love
supremacy
your-
is real in our
Are
country.
we supposed to judge by the
right?
content of our character, not by the color of our
Cis
skin?
privilege
Now
is
you're a
real in
victim.
our country.
Now you're a
So I would love your
No, I'm not a
No.
victim. That's the point.
Anyway.
I would love to stick to the Mayor Pete question. Donnie?
I think having him out there and being visible is fantastic for the community. I have a nephew, a 12-year-old nephew, who is a little gay boy. And for him to be able to see that there is a gay man who is running for president is fantastic.
So that's meaningful to you?
It's meaningful to have him there, absolutely.
Okay.
I'd rather have a beer with him than vote for him,
Yeah.
because he seems like you want to lean in and talk to him some more, and his fabulous theater-loving husband, they sound great. But
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that he's ready to run the country.
All right. So one thing that Jamie brought up was the terms non-binary and GNC, gender non-conforming. How does everybody here feel about the terms GNC, gender non-conforming, and non-binary, and the fact that it often falls under the umbrella of LGBTQ? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Sure. So I identify as non-binary and trans at the same time. I believe non-binary is under the trans umbrella. Non-binary for me means that I don't identify as a man or a woman. I'm neither, I am both, I am beyond. And that has nothing to do with my body. My body does not inform my gender.
I completely reject how non-binary people specifically have injected themselves into the trans label, because at the end of the day, I'm sure you're an amazing person. You and I have wildly different experiences. I am a transsexual. There's a medical basis for that. There's a scientific basis for that. And for non-binary, it's really not the case. I think that non-binary is more of a political term than anything else, which is why never met a non-binary Republican, non-binary libertarian. It's clearly an invention of the left in general. I also hate how non-binary people often, because they tend to be the loudest politically, they take over trans conversations. I often see non-binary people in the media and on YouTube and on social media deciding what is right for trans people and transsexuals. And I hate it because oftentimes it's not in alignment with most trans people I've actually met in my life.
So do you feel erased because of the term non-binary?
No one can erase me. Like I'm here, you know what I mean? But I mean, in terms of them taking over the conversation, oftentimes, yes. I think of a lot of the reasons why conservatives and people who are not in the LGBT community have a hard time understanding trans people, it often goes down to these talking points that were invented by non-binary people and people who are not trans, who their lived experience could not be any more different than mine. And so if it comes down to conversations about trans people, I just wish actual transsexuals were having them, and oftentimes it's activists who are non-binary.
I don't understand your argument that there's too much division, that we don't have shared life experiences, because among trans people, among binary trans people who may go through medical transition, there is so much variance. You are not a trans woman of color. You are not a poor trans woman. You have different experiences as a trans person that we need to talk about. We cannot parse out at the exact same time to have this conversation.
Yeah, everything's nuanced, but at the end of the day, there's a very fine line between someone who's a transsexual and grows up with gender dysphoria, grows up saving up that money to get the confirmation surgeries they need, going through coming out, going through the hardships that specifically transsexuals face. It is such a different life than someone who
You don't know my life. You don't know my experience with the gender dysphoria.
We don't know each other's life. I'm not saying that, but but a lot of non-binary people do not. You can say you do, and that's fine. I completely believe you, but a lot of them do not. A lot of non-binary people are the people who argue that you don't need gender dysphoria to be trans. And to me, that makes absolutely no sense, because if you don't have that misalignment in your brain and misalignment in your body and within who you are, then trans really means nothing.
Well, I'm non-binary, and I've never made that argument. My support of the trans community always comes at me saying that their voices is important, and I'm listening majority of the time. I think the importance of allyship is just to be in the listen mode, and then I use my privilege when necessary if they say that I need to, because I know that I'm non-binary, I know that I'm gender expansive, but I know how I present at the same time. But you also made a point that you said that you don't understand how non-binary people are making decisions on behalf of transgender people. I think that number one, you did kind of erase Jamie's when they said that they are non-binary and trans. So let's start there. And I think that also we can say that about the whole Republican Party, where we have majority white cisgender men making decisions on behalf of everyone.
Do you have thoughts on this?
That's what she said.
I don't identify as non-binary. I can't speak to that lived experience, but there are so many non-binary people that I know who identify that way, who fit so much of the gender spectrum, if you will. I know very feminine folks and very masculine folks who are assigned female at birth, so folks who are assigned male at birth. Some people have had hormones but no surgeries, and some have had surgeries and no hormones. And I wouldn't know how else to describe that particular group without using the word non-binary, because that's the word that they use. To say, that the word non-binary is potentially a creation of the left to cause division, I can't necessarily.
It's a political term.
It is.
It's a political term. It was born out of gender studies classes. It wasn't born out of transsexual people saying, well, maybe this word works as well. And that is my point, is that I think you're the one that said that I was erasing you as trans. I am. Like, you're not trans. Like, there's a medical definition of being a transsexual and being.
But what if those non-binary people do suffer from gender dysphoria?
Jamie, how are you doing?
I mean, that doesn't make you trans to just suffer from gender dysphoria. Being trans is having gender dysphoria and acting upon it to live a life as a transsexual. I think that's different.
I'm going to stop you. Jamie, how are you doing?
I'm okay.
You're okay?
Yeah.
Do you feel like talking? You don't have to. Okay. Brendan.
Can I say really quick that even the terms transsexual and transgender were made up, right? They were clinical terms in a lot of ways initially. So we can't use that as like a way of like demeaning people in our community. I mean, it's really unfortunate that we have to do that when we know outside of this room, people don't see any of us or treat any of us with respect.
But you know why? I think that a
right.
large reason why a lot of people do not understand trans people is because of non-binary and because of all these other identities that we've all talked about are constantly tacked onto the acronym that has always worked. Confuses it.
But how is it different when a cis woman tells you that you're not a woman, or for you to then tell Jamie that they're not trans?
Jamie, you have something to say.
Yes, I think this argument is absurd, this idea of you're creating more problems, you're creating more division, you're creating more confusion, because that same argument has been used by gays and lesbians against trans people.
Saying it sounds like another argument isn't an argument. It doesn't mean it's invalid. Saying
No, but
it
it's
sounds
the
like
exact same logic of saying, we're trying to
think
conform,
so.
we're trying to be part of the state, you are making this too complicated. And working with the state and working with the Trump administration in order to create inclusivity, you are erasing me and you're leaving me behind. I don't believe in a politic that leaves people behind. I say we start from the back, see who is the most marginalized, see what they need, and get their needs first, and then everyone moves forward at the exact same time.
Do you all feel welcomed by the LGBTQ community?
The LGBT community is very open to people who believe in the monolith that is known as the LGBT community.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that they're accepting towards LGBT people with different viewpoints at all.
Okay.
I had a very interesting experience 2 weeks ago at Pride in West Hollywood. My husband and I were at a restaurant. I was wearing my hat. And within a minute or so, 2 women stormed our table and began cussing at me, yelling at me, screaming. And one question like, what do you think about gay marriage? And I said, well, this is my husband, so I'm for it. How about the way he treats Mexicans? And I said, my name is Ramirez, I'm Mexican-American. And it kind of shut them down, but then they continued to yell and scream and try to incite the restaurant against us. But I think that the intelligent conversations I've had via the MAGA hat have gone much further than the negative vitriol that is incited by others.
So it's also a conversation starter for
Yes.
you. Okay. All right. Raquel, do you have thoughts on this?
I mean, I think that there is merit in the conversation of not everyone feeling welcome. I don't always feel welcome as a Black trans woman in every space. I still think a lot of the spaces that we have that are designated LGBTQ are so dominated by white cis gay men who tend to look a certain way and tend to move through the world in a certain way, right? And so I find my most power in spaces that are specifically for Black and brown trans folks, and I believe in that.
Donnie, how about you?
Navigating through the LGBT community has been very fascinating for me because I used to feel very comfortable in lesbian bars, and then when I started to present more masculine, that kind of went away. And actually one of my most recent experiences at a lesbian bar was being harassed and assaulted at a lesbian bar in New York City. So that was like this crazy shakeup of my whole life changing. And then, as I mentioned, I am married to a cisgender woman, and we were at Stonewall, of all places. And there was a table of I'm assuming, I'm making an assumption here, cis gay men there who saw us kiss, and it was like a cute little like, hi baby kiss. And we got the, ew, breeders, what are you doing at Stonewall thing? And it was like, wow, kid, you have no idea. First of all, I could have birthed you and, have been fighting for, liberation, gay liberation, queer liberation for longer than you've been around. But that's the assumption that they make based on what I look like now.
I can't believe that you've got 12 gay people here and nobody feels at home in the gay community, the LGBTQIA community. I think that speaks to, look, each of us has our own individual experiences, right? We're all humans who just want to live in the world and be accepted for who we are. And that was sort of what the community used to be. And I think part of what we're suffering from is the difference between what it meant to be a community of people that was all across the spectrum to being shoehorned into a political movement. The idea that we all have to row in the same direction politically, is I think a problem for us as a community.
Are there any questions that you would like to ask each other?
If I could ask a question to Blair, just to close too, I'm curious what you think about the gender binary. As a trans person who has experienced dysphoria, and I also experienced dysphoria, and I think the root of dysphoria And these feelings of transness is because there is a binary, because there is a limiting construct, social construct that tells people they can be one thing or the other. They can be feminine or masculine. And I think as a non-binary person, non-binary people are actually in the front lines of deconstructing that binary and breaking down those systems of limitation and restriction that I think will allow all of us to be freer. So I'm just curious, like, what truly is your problem with me because I'm fighting for you?
I don't have a problem with you personally. I don't know anything about your life personally. I would say, well, you said then about breaking down the binary, but you're kind of just automatically assuming that that is in the best interest of trans people, and that's what trans people want. I personally have never met a transsexual or trans woman who thinks that that is the way to go in terms of getting acceptance from the larger community. Okay, you're the first one. You're the first one.
I do think you're misunderstanding what I say when I say break the binary. I don't say like get rid of femininity, get rid of masculinity, get rid of women, get rid of men. I'm not saying that whatsoever. I'm saying open up the options, let people be and live and exist as their full authentic selves outside of these limits.
I'm not here to limit anyone's options or say that you can't call yourself what you want.
Well, I have earlier that I'm not
Let me
trans.
roll it back. I have an issue with trans people that are not trans saying they're trans when they're not. That's what I have an issue with.
By your definition of trans. Okay.
Because I don't have an issue with the non-binary label besides me thinking, okay, there's not really a ton of science behind it. That's fine. I don't like how in the beginning you said that non-binary, you consider that to also be trans. And that falls under trans. Because I think that, well, hold on. Because I think that again, dilutes the message. It demedicalizes it, which I think is very, very bad for trans people. I think
non-binary people need medical intervention as well. We need healthcare. We need
and that's
non-binary
fine, but that's fine. And that's why I would say that I would hope that you guys would, if you're going to advocate for that, do it on behalf of yourselves and not try to squeeze into the T label, a label that historically we are still trying to get people to just understand and be halfway okay with. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't help when 97 genders are squeezed into the T label, because at the end of the day, being trans is about, for most trans people, it is about, I was born as a boy, born as a girl, and I identify as the other. And what I find oftentimes is this conversation, a really good example of how non-binary people really dominate the conversation about being trans is that I will get comments sometimes on my Instagram, people accusing me of believing in 97 genders and all those sort of things that are touted by non-binary people just because I'm trans. That's a good example of how people don't know what trans is then, because trans people are transitioning from one to the other.
I mean, this is a conversation about language too, because you're saying most trans people understand transness as M to F, F to M as a binary. If you actually look at research, 50% of trans youth identify as non-binary. Mm-hmm. That it's a growing community within trans people.
That's because you guys are forcing it to be.
Nobody is
we are giving people, I believe we
politicization.
are giving people options to express themselves.
Cis and trans,
But they were always there.
Stuff like that. Like,
You're
cis
not
being
doing
the same
anything
trans
new.
opposite.
Non-binary feelings have existed forever.
Agreed.
We now have
There's
language
nothing
to talk
new about
it.
what you're doing. You've just made it political.
I think that you have a very narrow definition of what trans is, and that could be respected, but that just doesn't work for most people. You generalize a lot of trans people. You said for most trans people, and then I look to my left.
Generalizing would say all.
I'm almost finished. And I look to my left, and she was like, well, she doesn't agree with you. And also, all of my trans sisters and all my trans brothers that I have in my life support me, and they know I support them, and they want me to come along with them on this journey as a non-binary person, because they know that in order for any of us to be free, we all have to be free. Mm-hmm. So that's where my perspective is. So I know your perspective is different. Thank you for that.
You're
Thank
free.
you, darling. Thank you, darling. I appreciate that. Don't tell me what I am.
Good.
I know that this conversation has been hard for some people. I know that you're probably going to go home and you're going to think about this. And I want to thank you for being here, because it's not everybody who's willing to engage in these kinds of conversations. This is a difficult thing to do. And I have immense respect for each and every one of you for showing up. I really do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And with that,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're going to wrap this up.
Oh my God, I missed my pants. Jesus Christ.
Nice meeting you. Yeah. Zachary. Oh God, I didn't even ask. Yeah, sure. I